What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cojones with Santiago. Today's episode is a little bit different because I'll actually be reacting to a panel that Vice did on what it means to be a man. Now, my initial impressions of the gentlemen that are sitting in these chairs is that they really tried to get a diverse group of people, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of differing opinions on what being a man is all about, what masculinity actually means, and things like that. So I'm excited. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
Paying 150 for a first date,
Man,
and then you
150 for
just
the first
ghost me.
date.
And the next week I'm like hurting for cash. I'm like, I could have really used that 150. Like, why did I have to?
Also, the trade-off of like going on a date and as the man being like, "Oh, this sucks, I have to pay," or as the woman being like, "Oh, this sucks, I might get murdered," is like a pretty big.
Yeah, but what-
Hold on, pause. So first of all, my man, you pay 150 on a first date and then you're like, man, you're hurting for cash. You probably should budget better. I mean, that's the first thing I would say is like you should probably budget better, learn to actually manage your money. The second thing I would say is you could have always just taken her to, to a Starbucks or something like that, grabbed a cup of coffee, gotten to know each other a little bit. You don't necessarily have to hit a home run the first date and take her out to a bar, have some drinks and stuff like that. So I would say that that's entirely on you. Sure, there might be some expectations by society, but you don't necessarily have to play by those rules. But I gotta say, we're already off to a pretty shaky start because they got a dude in a dress talking about what it means to be a man. And immediately, like what we get from this person is a hyperbole. Is like, oh, 150 for a first date or getting murdered. It's like, bruh, come on, man, get serious, get serious. But we're 19 seconds in, and I already know this guy in this dress and I are gonna get along swimmingly.
How you guys doing?
Male identifying and non-binary folk.
My name's Krishna. Thank you all for being here and talking through masculinity, what it means to be a man, etc. Obviously, we couldn't fit every man in the country into this room. We tried to get a diverse perspective, but of course, that caveat.
Man, hold on one second. They couldn't fit every man into this group, but you guys couldn't find a single Latino. You guys found a guy in a dress to talk about what it means to be a man, but not one Latino is on this panel. I'm just saying. Vice, next time you do something like this, hit me up. I'll move some things around and I'll help you out.
I wanted to start by telling you why this is something that I'm interested in. I have an 8-year-old son, and I'm seeing him absorb what manliness might mean. I'm thinking to myself, like, what does it mean to be a man? To start, maybe we could just introduce each other to
you
each
have an
other.
8-year-old son. You should
If you
probably
were to
figure out
describe what it means to be a man or to be masculine.
My name is Tahoe. I'm a black man from the hood. When I was young, being a man, you had to be tough. You had to be hard. And now, to me, being a man is a lot different. Now, to me, being a man is knowing when to be soft. Knowing that you don't always have to run the charge. You can actually listen. You know what I mean? So things have changed a lot over the course of the years for me.
I'm Griffin, and I don't identify as a man. I'm non-binary.
Brooks.
I still have elements of my identity that are masculine, elements that are feminine, elements that don't fall within that range. And
so make no mistake, Griffin,
feel
whether or not you identify as a man, you are one. So
tied to like the norms or the confines of gender at all.
Well, welcome.
My name is Dylan, and I think that the notion of masculinity is just something that can be possessed by man or woman. Man, woman, non-gender conforming person. What it means to be masculine is just like, changing and like very fluid. But I think that, masculinity is something that just,
Man, let's stop right here really quick. So far, we've heard from a couple different people on what it means to be a man. And we haven't really gotten an answer, not even close. And saying that it's all depending on the person and like it could all be really fluid. I don't really think that that's the actual answer of what it means to be a man. So we're 3 people into this panel where they describe what it means to be a man, and not one of them can actually nail something down. So hopefully we see something better moving forward.
like you embody based off of just like how you show up in this world as a man and just like, how you go about being your day to day.
How you show up. Interesting.
That doesn't mean
What's
anything.
up, guys? My name is Paul. I'm a fitness entrepreneur. I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 4 years old with my family. It's kind of funny how we're talking about it. My take on masculinity is not about talking as much as doing. I think at its
I mean,
at
that's
its
a part of it
core,
for sure.
a man has to be efficient, competent, and be willing to do what it takes for themselves and their loved ones.
I was not always a good man. I was not always what you would
My
call a
man.
healthy masculine
Hold
man.
on a second. Casey Barker is his name, from Texas. They got a dude, from Texas with the cowboy hat talking about masculinity. I think we're in for a treat.
And so, as my life has changed, I've identified 5 points that I think make a truly masculine man
Man,
masculine.
5
I
points.
think
All
point
right.
number 1 is a man who walks with God.
Amen.
Point number 2 is a man who stands on principle.
Amen.
Point number 3, which
Principle.
is a masculine man, is self-sacrificing.
Okay.
So someone who is willing to sacrifice for point 4 the people that he leads. A true man is a leader.
All right.
And number 5, a masculine man is never a coward.
That's a lot there.
Man, so a couple things here. The first, God bless this man named Casey, coming onto Vice of all places and being unapologetically Christian. I'm all for it, right? The first point of being a good man, he says, is being a follower of Jesus Christ, which I totally agree as a Christian myself. The second thing is this dude, he came in here prepared like he was reading out like a book report in front of his class. He's like, I got these 5 points. I'm prepared. I did my homework, which I can definitely appreciate, because so far he's the only one who's actually given anything remotely close to an answer when it comes to the question what it means to be a man. The second, the last point here that I want to make, and I'll actually like rewind a little bit and play this back, but let's see. Like, I just want to call something out really quick.
2 is a man who stands on principle. Point number 3,
So,
which is a masculine man, is
Watch
self-sacrificing.
the
So
guy
someone who is willing
in the
to
dress.
sacrifice for point 4 the people that he leads. A true man is a leader. And number
Look
5,
at that. Completely
masculine man is
disinterested.
never a
Look at his
coward.
face.
That's a lot
Just
there.
smug,
Yeah.
right? Like, he's just making a smug face, looking down at his nails, not paying attention, because as soon as this guy said that he was a Christian, a follower of God, and had principles and whatever, and like, boom, he's what a lot of people might consider a man's man. Griffin, right? The guy in the dress immediately tuned out. He no longer cared, right? In his brain, he's not going to even try to understand where Casey is coming from. He doesn't care. He doesn't give a damn, because as far as Griffin is concerned, being a man is whatever you feel like it is today. And you could always just change your mind, because like, why not? Definitions don't actually matter. So I think this is going to be seeing the interaction between those two in particular might be interesting moving forward.
Let's get into that as we go on.
I think what it means to be a man is responsibility.
Okay.
As a man, it can come with a lot of power. And with great power comes great responsibility.
Bruh.
In short words.
Hold. Yo, the best you could come up with is a Spider-Man quote. Come on, man. They got the guy that looks like Miles Morales out here quoting Uncle Ben. Come on, dude. I mean, you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong. With great power comes great responsibility. But like, for real, bro, come on. Such a cliche quote that's so overused in so many different contexts. That's what you're going to use as your introduction on this Vice panel. I think we could do a little bit better.
That's it.
That's from Spider-Man, I think.
Yeah,
right?
Bruh.
Uncle Ben.
He called him out, man.
James.
Well, my name is James Killen, former United States Marine turned Air
Right.
Force officer.
Hey,
got a
whoop.
couple combat tours, but I'm also a father of 3 girls who mellowed me out. The idea of
definitely relate.
masculinity is something that I find interesting because it is changing, and I can actually see those changes in myself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this panel.
Just really quick, I disagree with him here. First of all, man, thank you for your service, one vet to another. Raising 3 girls. I mean, I got 3 kids, not 3 girls. 1 daughter for me is plenty. So I can only imagine, and I can definitely understand where you're coming from. My kids have mellowed me out as well. Where I disagree with him is that the definition of masculinity is changing. That's not true. The definition of masculinity has been the same forever. Our understanding of what it means to be a good man, to be truly masculine, those things might be evolving, and you might be changing and growing in your daily pursuit of excellence. But the underlying definition, the characteristics, the traits, the values, the principles that make up a good man, those things have always been the same. So that's not changing. Right. The better way to phrase this would be that your personal understanding of what it means to be a good man is changing, not the definition itself.
Thanks for your service. Andre.
Hey, what's up? Yeah,
What's
men,
up?
men.
Man, this dude high as hell.
I think my idea of a real man is, someone that gets the job done, and provides and all that. I don't even know what that means anymore, but
Man, this poor young man. I feel like this is an individual that lacks direction in his life. Just the way he answered this question. I don't know anything about him, and I'm just saying he's looking around, like doesn't really know like what's up. Doesn't really scream confidence as he's answering this question. So, man, my man Andre, he might be high though, so that could explain it.
um, yeah, I don't know. It's changing every day.
How do you think it's changing?
No, it just seems like everything is changing every day. It's like a new world order.
Oh
So I
man,
don't.
hold on a second. Illuminati
I
confirmed.
have a hard time keeping up with stuff. So I feel like tomorrow it's gonna be something else, and people are gonna comment and be like, "You're wrong. It's this now."
Man, all right. So we could totally appreciate where he's coming from here, in saying that things are changing, and I can definitely understand if this guy is like in his early 20s, trying to navigate whether it's the dating landscape or anything like that in this world where definitions don't matter. Men can be women, women can be men. I can appreciate his frustration here a little bit and what he's trying to say. He obviously doesn't want to come out and piss anybody off, a couple minutes into this panel, but I think most of us can probably read between the lines and what he's trying to get at. So I feel for this young man already.
It is hard to talk about some of this stuff because you feel like you might say the wrong thing.
I'm not really masculine myself, so I can't. I
You
feel
don't
like I'm
say.
like the wrong person to ask.
Maybe the right person to ask. Christian.
What it means to be a man is to be a adult human male.
That's sort of a very formal definition.
All
but I
right,
think
Christian.
that might be a good place to kick off.
I mean, hey, he's not wrong. I would say he probably gave the second best definition out of anybody, right? So my man Casey from Texas with his PowerPoint slides absolutely gave the best definition of what it means to be a man. The things that you would expect in a good man. But yeah, this other guy here, absolutely right. An adult human male, like 100%. So that already takes away some of the ambiguity and some of the some of the opinions that Griffin might bring to the table. So we'll see.
There's a lot of talk, of writing, of research these days that says there's a crisis in masculinity. Is there a crisis in masculinity? And if so, like, what is that crisis?
The thing that I see is a lot of deconstructing generational trauma. The be a man, boys don't cry, this, that, and the other thing. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why we see it as a crisis, because we're actually trying to redefine what it means to be a man, and none of us have any idea because we're just out here trying to be whoever we are.
Man, I really want to like this guy, but so far I'm having a hard time. So I agree that we are kind of in this process of deconstructing what it means to be a man, using his words, right? We're kind of reevaluating some of the things that we held to be true as a society by saying things like boys don't cry and all of these things. And as a father of two young boys, I have to tell you that those are things that I'm trying to change in raising my sons, and telling them that it's okay for you to feel emotion. It's okay for you to express those emotions, whereas in a different time men were told to suppress and don't exhibit any type of emotion, because that would be considered weakness or feminine. But again, where he says things like none of us have any clue, it's like, well, back it up. You might not have a clue, and if that's the case, by all means keep trying to figure it out. But I think there are plenty of people who do have a really good idea of what it means to be a man. And I would even argue that this guy's making these comments, the guy in the pink shirt, he probably has a really good idea of what it means to be a man, but maybe he doesn't want to step on any toes, right? Maybe he's too busy. He was a military officer, so he's very good at using a lot of words without saying anything at all. So, so far, I'm not really liking the answers that he's giving in particular, because he's essentially saying none of us really know what it means to be a man, which I totally disagree with. It's okay for you to admit that you're learning, that you're growing, that you're evolving, that your understanding of what it means to be a man is changing in your pursuit of actual masculinity and manliness. But for you to just kind of say, well, we don't have a clue and we're kind of just fumbling our way through life, like, nah, man, that's not the answer either.
That's right. I
No,
think
it's not,
that
but okay.
historically, being a man was rooted in patriarchy and misogyny.
Patriarchy and misogyny aren't the same
we
thing.
realize how harmful that has been over the years.
Not entirely. I
And
mean,
so we
yeah,
don't.
look, absolutely right. There are obvious cases here where women were subjugated and they didn't have rights, and those things were 100% things we should have been fighting for. I believe that women should have rights. Um, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, though. Patriarchy, some of you may say, was 100% bad, but human history and civilization wouldn't have existed without the patriarchy. That's just a matter of fact. And I think when we're talking about misogyny, as in like the hate towards women, patriarchy and misogyny are not the same thing, and sometimes they get conflated, and they're not at all the same thing. Misogyny is 100% bad. Patriarchy, depending on how we're talking about it, can be a useful structure, whether it's to structure your family or whether to structure society. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there. That's my opinion, but
don't really know how to define where we're supposed to be. And I think the reason, as they're saying, is a crisis is because the box has gotten so small for just being, say, straight, just being a hetero, right? Because if you do anything, women judge you.
What do you mean anything?
If I dance a certain way, or if I wear my hair a certain way, if I dress a certain way, they go, real men don't do that.
okay, so like, how are you dancing that a woman would tell you women don't do that? Because I mean, there are plenty of men that know how to dance, sensually, whether it's like bachata or something like that, and women love that kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, if you're out here twerking, maybe if you throw on a dress like Griffin and you start twerking, and a woman sees you and you're like, hey, real men don't do that, they might be onto something. The other thing too is like women have a vested interest in trying to make men manly, because those are the people they want to marry. So if you have women telling you the way you're behaving isn't manly or isn't what they would expect to see in a man, I wouldn't necessarily take that as like criticism. I would take that as an opportunity for you to grow, as an opportunity for you to evaluate your behavior, and especially if you're looking for a mate. I don't know what this guy's dating situation, whether he's married or what, like, I honestly don't know. But if you're single and you're trying to find a woman to settle down with, and they make comments to you like, real men don't do that, you might want to listen to what they have to say, because in a lot of ways you could take that as them helping you, right? You can take that as an explanation for what you're missing and why you're still alone. So um I guess I'll leave that one there.
Real men don't do that. And so you get scared to move a certain way because you don't want to get judged or outed out of the accepted part of your community. And I think that
I
kind of
mean,
has
this
us
guy
in
might
an
be gay
uproar,
and he just doesn't want
and
to
we
come out of
don't
the
know
closet.
where to be.
And if he's
Like,
gay, I
where's the
mean, that's
safe
fine, or
place to
bi
be
or whatever. Like, hey, do you,
for
but
men now? You know
just
what I
come out,
mean?
because I mean,
And it's kind of disturbing.
I was what you would call a toxic masculine male growing up. And I had good men that sewed into me.
Griffin's face is
they
like,
gave
you
me
don't
good
say.
advice, but I never found manhood or never understood my place as a man until one day I humbled myself and I gave my life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you right now,
Man,
walking with God changed my life
preach.
forever.
Preach,
can you
homie.
define toxic masculinity? Like,
I
what
would
does
say
that mean?
toxic masculinity is like what he was just saying, where you're using that leadership role or that aggressive nature in a harmful way to harm other people to get your way. So the biblical structure for manhood is very humble. It's self-sacrifice. It's not self-motivated, but it is motivated by principle and standing on what's right. So there is a clear-cut vision for manhood in the Bible that I live by, and I think our culture used to live by, and I think our culture has lost its way.
I think everybody sort of
Man,
has a different.
hold on one second. Hold on one second. My man Casey from Texas, God bless you. He is spitting facts, and I 100% appreciate this. So maybe that's why I don't understand and can't really relate to the other men that are giving these very fluffy answers where they're using so many words without saying anything at all. And it's because, from my perspective, what it means to be a good man is very well defined in the Bible, and that's how I choose to live my life. So, and he articulated it beautifully, Casey. Like, kudos to you, man. Great job. Um, for a man to be a good man, it's not about power. First and foremost, being a good man is acknowledging that there is a power above you 100% of the time, right? And you have to humble yourself before God. And it's in the pursuit of godliness. It's in the pursuit, right, of sanctification, where you are living your life trying to become a better man, that you grow and you start to come into what the Bible would define as a good man, right? Somebody who is humble, somebody who is self-sacrificing, somebody who, essentially the way Jesus Christ is with the church, that's how I'm supposed to be with my wife and my family, right? And Jesus Christ made the ultimate sacrifice for the church. And it's those ideas that kind of guide, no, not the kind of, that guide how I see myself as a man. And now, not everybody who watches this is going to be a Christian, and I can totally understand and relate that, but we can't at all discount the perspective of men like Casey and I who do follow the Bible and who seem to have a much better understanding and a grasp, a tangible definition that we can give you of what it means to be a man, where everybody else is saying, well, I don't really have a clue. It's like, well, maybe having a definition of morality, a guideline to follow, is better than giving these fluffy answers where you're using all these words without really saying anything at all.
Definition of toxic masculinity. I don't find masculinity toxic in and of itself.
I agree.
But I do believe in bad men, and bad men exist.
Sure thing.
But does that mean every man is toxically masculine? No.
We were talking about a crisis on
100%
masculinity.
agree.
I think that there's a lack of understanding there. So it's like masculinity, being masculine isn't toxic. It's just like there are portions of it that you can dive into that make it toxic.
Because I think a lot of what we think of masculinity is tied into patriarchy, right? Which is to say, like, for the longest period of human history, like, men dominated women and got the lion's share of stuff.
I think a lot of times some people make masculinity into a caricature, like it has to be this alpha bro tough guy.
Exactly.
And I find the low-key guy who, is a really great father and a great husband and maybe not like drinking raw eggs every day to be a lot more masculine than the alpha bro who's going and like banging 20 women per weekend and not a responsible man. I find it more masculine to be a good guy.
I think that
Man, I'm gonna stop right there. I think his name is Christian, is spitting straight facts, like straight facts. And he's right. Society has made a caricature of what it means to be a man, a good man. And sometimes like we see, the guy who's out there lifting weights, and I love to lift weights and stuff like that, but the guy who's out there lifting weights, banging all these girls and stuff like that, that's the caricature of masculinity that he's talking about, when in reality what he describes is what I would say, all of us would agree is a good man, someone who takes responsibility for his own, is raising children, is a good father, is gentle, is strong, dependable. All of these different characteristics and traits come together and they form a good man. So it seems like Christian, I think that's his name, has a pretty good understanding of what a good man actually looks like.
the background of this is that we are saying that gender is this like real thing that
It is.
has real ideas and implications. And Griffin, I'm wondering, as someone who identifies as non-binary, how does this conversation strike you?
Well, I think that it kind of becomes like irrelevant whether or not we attribute like having like a good ethical compass to being like masculine. Attributing that to like the gender constructs which we have made up, which are like somewhat pointless, like kind of just feed into needless roles that uphold the patriarchy without even knowing it. A lot of those things are just things that people should be doing because they're like morally right. Like if you're in a family, you should probably support your family. And I really don't think that it has to do with like your manhood.
All right, so if you wanted an example of a word salad, we just got one from Griffin, using a whole lot of words without saying anything of substance. Where I agree with him is that, ethics and morality aren't necessarily tied to being a man. That comes down to being a good person, right? Both men and women have or should have some type of ethical and moral compass that guides them. And if 100%, if you are a mother, you should care for your children. And if you are a father, you should care for your children. I agree with him there, right? That should not be tied to your gender, right? You should do the right thing. Where I disagree is in calling things like gender arbitrary and gender norms and things like that and societal roles. Like none of that is arbitrary and all of that exists for a reason. Again, I expected nothing less from the dude in a dress. So let's keep it moving.
These characteristics that we're talking about are baked into an old system of domestic life.
I think that's actually where we get toxic masculinity. Like none of us can really describe what it is, but we can see it when it happens.
So we learn it, right?
Yeah.
This is something we learn from the
Man,
world.
The guy in the pink shirt, the man who can't define a single thing.
It's something we learned from like TV and shit, and it's maybe something we learned from our dads too. Tell me about your dad.
I'm a first generation kid. My dad is from Guyana. Grew up in very humble beginnings, poor family. First time I remember my dad telling me he loved me was when I was 17. And he was like saying like he was proud of me because I was about to graduate high school and things like that, you know. I'm appreciative of all the other things, you know, being present as a provider, but in terms of like, you know, the conversation piece and like, oh, I want to talk to my dad about, you know, sex or something, or I want to talk to my dad about, oh, this person broke up with me and I'm feeling pretty sad about it. I didn't have those conversations.
So like emotional language as part of like how you talk to your dad.
Yeah.
And my definition of manhood came solely from my relationship with God. It didn't come from my father. It didn't come from the good influences around me.
Is God a man?
Yeah, and God is a man. God is a father, and he's a good father. He's a perfect father. And so I think there is a clear definition of manhood where I guess that's where I diverge from everyone else in the room. I believe manhood is clearly defined by God. It is the perfect example of what a man should be.
Christian, I see you not.
So, I mean, you guys already know that I agree with Casey on a lot here. I have an amazing father, and my dad is a Christian. He is a follower of Jesus Christ, and he raised me with the Bible as the guiding principle, right? So he was trying to model the behavior that the Bible calls for all of us to model. So I understand where he's coming from here and saying that we're, you know, everything he learned about being a good man, he learned from God and learned from the Bible. You know, this is an interesting conversation, right? Is God a man? And some people might say, no, you know, God there is no gender, and God can, you know, he's spirit and he's ethereal or whatever have you. I think that that's wrong, right? I think Casey's take here is correct. God is in fact a man, he is a father. Why do we know this? In how he chooses to reveal himself to his people, right? God chooses to reveal himself as masculine. So we can't discount and discredit the way that God chose to reveal himself to Israel and to his people. But there's also a very, you know, important characteristic here when we're talking, or rather an important conversation when we're talking about masculine and feminine and traits that could be considered masculine and feminine, where to me, Jesus Christ is the epitome of the perfect man. Not the neutered Western version of Jesus Christ that kind of looks like Obi-Wan, but like the actual version, the actual Jesus Christ found in the Bible is an example of the perfect man. And we could see the Bible as a whole pointing to Jesus Christ. So in the Old Testament, when there are prophecies talking about Jesus Christ coming, or Christophanies, where he actually shows up, and then in the New Testament throughout his life, we see what it means to be both strong and also gentle. And it's this balance that creates a perfect man, what it means to be a man and what we should all be pursuing. You know, because in Luke 13, it even talks about how Jesus Christ wished that like a hen, he could protect, you know, Jerusalem under his wings. And that to me seems very caring. It seems very tender. And people would attribute things like that to like feminine energy. Whereas in other verses, he talks about not coming for peace, but rather with the sword. So things like that, there's this constant balance, and you know, it's not one or the other, right? It does not have to be, this part of the conversation doesn't need to be binary, right? It's more of a blend of these different characteristics in the correct ratio that make a good man.
On your head.
I grew up in a divorced home. When you do grow up in a broken home and you don't have a father in the home, you recognize how important sort of both males and females are in raising a child and being in the home.
Yo, Christian is based, man. I'll tell you, like, he's totally right. Right, the importance of fathers in homes is something that our society has been discounting and discrediting for a really long time. And there are so many examples, whether it's in custody court or whatever, you know, however you want to look at this. But he's 100% correct, right? It's both roles that matter, the mother and the father. And I think that in acknowledging that, you could see the growth in him as an individual, saying like he has come to understand the importance of these things. And that to me leads me to believe that at some point he didn't really get it, but now he sees the importance of it. And it's funny because I'm actually sensing a lot of tension between Christian, who I'm assuming is gay just based on his mannerisms, and Griffin, the dude in the dress. So it's you know, this is interesting, that two people who would fall within the LGBTQ community are seemingly at odds, where one of them is saying, well, none of this matters and it's all made up. And the other one is saying, like, man, you know, a man is a biological male and fathers matter. So let's keep it rolling.
Balance between, you know, masculine energy and feminine energy.
Absolutely.
And I feel like
talk
there's,
about this a little
there's
bit. Yeah.
both within everybody. And so there's a balance that with masculine energy in itself that I think a lot of people have trouble trying to like reconcile within themselves. Like, yes, being a man, you work hard, you take care of your people, but you got to be able to have that emotional side too, which is where the feminine energy comes in.
Y'all just like triggered something in my head when y'all was speaking about having both in the home. To me, I didn't really have it that, and it made me feel a way. But I think that I always wanted one, and so I wound up at a certain age going outside and trying
Like
to
most
find
people
what
do,
masculinity
who don't
was
have a dad.
outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went on the corner, and there were 20 of us on the corner, and none of us had dads. We were all messed up.
Like, let's just stop for a second and appreciate how sad that is, right? And I know it's true. I know it's true. He said he was from New York and stuff like that. So if he's talking about he grew up in the hood, like, he's not lying here, right? So that's really sad, right? And even a grown man is like, man, he's triggered, right? So I'm assuming he has some type of a revelation, in like, saying he went out looking for a dad because he didn't have one. That further highlights the importance of a father, right? An actual father, someone that we can define as a masculine male raising children, not these fluffy definitionless descriptions of someone who might be a dad.
And so we all taught each other the wrong way to love, to be loved. And then I think in society, there's way more people like that.
And a lot of kids who don't have fathers in the home,
No,
look for that father in the world or in a different way.
Yeah. Well, first, I think that like attributing like proper family values to like a heterosexual couple with children is like just not effective. Like I think that it's obviously like a heteronormative take to be like man and woman and then a child, and that's how
So
you create.
let me ask you this, Griffin. How else do you get children? How else do we get children? Man and woman, and then you get a child. Like, you can't rub two logs together, right, and make a baby. So how else do we? So yeah, it is heteronormative because that's literally the only way that children are created. So I'm sorry to put this out there, but lesbian couples and gay couples, or whatever other, alphabet soup you want to throw together, couples that can't make a baby on their own, how do you get a couple? It's like, well, a man and a woman had to make a baby, for you to even be able to consider a family. So yes, right, the father's role here is very important. It was extremely important in making the baby, and it's equally important in raising the baby. So yeah, again, I mean, hey, it is what it is.
Like a good family, and whether it's like a single mother, single father, or like a queer couple.
No, so single mother, single father. We already know that single motherhood, as far as raising kids that end up criminals, that correlation is definitely there, right? So broken homes produce broken people. So when we're already talking about one parent, we're going to stop right there and disagree. Like, there's plenty of evidence that shows that healthy kids are raised by healthy couples, right? So the single mother, single father thing, like, nah, I'm sorry. Like, you can do your best, and not every kid that comes out of those households are going to come out broken, but there's a clear difference between a child raised by a loving mother and a father and a child raised in a broken home. The outcomes are, like, you can't even debate this, right? The facts are very clear.
To like attribute men and women to like certain roles in the household, I think that it's only due to nurture those gender norms that we follow.
Male and female matters. God gives you one of those identities, you take on that role.
My
and now
man.
you're responsible for not or for fulfilling that role. There's a masculine crisis because men are not taking responsibilities for the God-given roles that they have in society.
Look at his face. Look at him.
And so when
He's
you
like,
take away the need to say God made you this or God made you this, now you don't have to take responsibility for not fulfilling what you were called to do.
When you do that, you also take away other things that somebody else may do. If I have a woman or a partner that wants to take on certain roles and I say, hey, those are my roles that God gave me in society, now I'm suppressing that person. Like, at the end of the day, we're all human beings.
No. So again, all right, hold on. Let's think about this for a second, right? So It is my job in my house to lead my wife and my children. That is my job. I am the head of my household. And I believe that's the role that all men should be fulfilling in their households. That doesn't mean that I'm a dictator. That doesn't mean that, that my wife can't step in when I'm not around, or when I'm, unable to do something, and vice versa, right? So for example, if I have to cook, or if I have to clean, do the laundry, those are all things, like, I don't attribute any of those things as my wife's job, my wife's duty, right? What you know there are certain, like, immutable things that, yeah, we can't really debate here. Like, for example, if something goes bump in the night, who gets up and goes checks it out? What kind of a man would I be if I woke my wife up and it was like, oh, I heard a noise, like, baby, you go check it out? Not a man she would ever want to be with, right? So, like, the role of protector falls on me. But let's say I'm gone. Let's say I'm on a business trip, or I'm not around. Then the role of protector falls to my wife, as protector of the children. But the default, like, who is ultimately responsible for protecting this family? That's me. That's me. And I cannot abdicate my responsibility in that way, right? Who's responsible for providing for this family? Again, that's me. And I can't abdicate my responsibility in that way. So when you're talking about suppressing people and, like, whatever have you, like, what are we actually saying? What are we actually saying? Is it like, oh, your wife is really good at that, like, she wants to be a carpenter, she's really good at building things, and you say, nah, that's like the dude's thing, and like, okay, that's silly, right? That's an example of something that's silly. But if we're talking about roles that you clearly must fulfill as the husband, and you're trying to put that off on your wife because she wants you to, like, then you need to put your foot down and lead your wife and help her understand, and vice versa, right? Like, there are things that only your wife can do, and those are things for you to understand. For example, when my kids are sick, they don't want anything to do with me, they go to my wife. But when my kids are hurt, they want dad, right? And these are the roles that kind of just come up on their own. And if I tried to say my wife really wanted my kids to go to her when the kids were hurt, but the kids don't want anything to do with her, and I'm like, no, 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 baby, that's my role, that's my role. Or I try to force the kids to like go to her when they don't want to. Like, okay, that's unhealthy, but I don't think that's what we're talking about here.
You define who you are and how you behave under God. That's what God gave us, free will.
But also, like, I think
No, no, you don't define who you are and how you behave. So the Bible defines how you should behave, right? So, and the reason I'm saying this is because he brought up under God. Everybody has a different moral compass, and I'm not going to speak to you. If you're an atheist and you're like, well, I totally disagree with the Bible, then you get your morality from wherever you get it, and then you choose to behave how you want to choose, how you want to behave. But Tahoe here was just talking about under God, under God. If we're talking about under God, you do not define how you behave or who you are under God. The Bible does that for you, right? Very clearly. So no, that's somebody who doesn't actually read their Bible. They might call themselves a Christian, but they don't actually understand or have ever read and studied scripture. So let's not play around.
think that the religious beliefs should not be used to like dictate how other people identify or how other people live their lives.
Humans need predictability. And when we put each other in these boxes, it gives us the opportunity to make decisions quickly. And I think that's what we're fighting is as a civilization at the moment, is the desire to put 7.5 billion people in specific boxes so that we can have some sort of predictability or stability in our lives. I was an emotionally abusive young man in my 20s because I had an idea of what my wife should do. And it caused a lot of stress.
Why were you the way you were?
I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of pent up rage. I had, some combat stress that I had to deal with also that I wasn't dealing with because men don't show emotion.
There is a social
So I will just say here that everything he's saying is like a failure of us being able to like define or understand what it means to be a man. And everybody kind of again, it highlights the individual's responsibility of pursuing that discernment, and pursuing an understanding of actual healthy masculinity. So we're all trying to better understand what it means to be a man, but that doesn't mean that the definition itself isn't very well defined, right? I think we can easily define what a good man actually is, and we're all trying to pursue that. But saying that we all can't figure it out and like blah blah blah, Yeah, I don't know about that.
construct that benefits men. And so the responsibility that I've learned as I've gotten older is learning how to not enforce my power, learning over women, over people.
You're saying that that role gives men more
Privilege?
like an advantage and privilege. I'm saying that it is more self-sacrificing. I do not
It's a
have free
burden.
time. I do not have hobbies. I do not wake up during the day and do what I want to do ever. I'm thinking about my wife, my kids, my business.
But that's your decision, and that's not like a mandatory thing of your masculinity.
Well,
It is. It is. So like again, the dude in the dress, right? So check this out. Men go out, find wives for what reason? To start a family. You start a family, you raise that family, and your existence from then on, once you start that family, is one of self-sacrifice. Even from before that, once you have a wife, it's your job to take care of her. So when this guy who's crossing his arms, wearing a dress, has the luxury of spouting nonsense because he lives in the most prosperous nation to ever exist, of course, Griffin doesn't realize how privileged he is, right, growing up in the West, because this identity crisis isn't happening in the third world. They very much they understand very well gender norms, and everybody fills their role. And men and women exist to start families, and those families then go on to be the cornerstone of society that build great things, right? But of course, the pampered child from the West can't understand that, right? Because I'm assuming he's probably in his early 20s here. He didn't have any real responsibility. Mommy and daddy, depending on his home, told him he could be whatever he wants to be. And now he's like, well, that's your choice. I don't have to do like blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, this is a perfect example of the crisis that we're talking about, the masculinity crisis, where more and more men are choosing not to take responsibility. More and more men are saying, I don't want to be a man. I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to actually step up and fulfill my duties. I just want to cross my hands on this panel and pout and say, "Well, that's your choice." It's like if if the world were filled with men like Griffin, nothing would ever get done. So, I mean, obviously, I haven't agreed with a single thing that's come out of this dude's mouth. But again, what can we expect?
If you believe that God is true,
I don't.
and you believe that He is God,
Well, I mean,
then you do
all right.
have that responsibility.
What privileges are you referring to? Like, what privileges do men have?
We've constructed this entire society to benefit us.
Break it down. Like, what privileges exactly?
Like we talk about the wage gap, or if you
That
look at
doesn't
Roe versus
exist.
Wade, men controlling
What
women's
about it?
bodies.
So
Even
Roe
if they're-
versus Wade is shifting the decision of abortion to the states. So like this guy, man, Tahoe. Most of the dudes on this panel are just spouting talking points that have just been regurgitated like boom, boom, boom over time, over and over and over and over. And I can kind of see where the guy in the suede jacket here is asking like specifically, what are you talking about? Because there is a crisis where young boys are being left behind in school, right? They're graduating high school at a lower rate than females are. They're going to college at a lower rate than females are. They're working harder jobs. The incarceration rate is higher for men. The suicide rate is higher for men. Custody court favors women. When we talk about all of these things, like what privileges are you actually referring to? Right. So, and I'm not interested in regurgitating talking points that you guys got from Brian Stelter or Don Lemon or like, I'm not really interested in those things. If you want to have a real conversation, then let's do it.
There might be those privileges. There's also more men who commit suicide, more men incarcerated.
My
when you talk
man.
about, like,
My
incarceration
man.
rates and things like that, like things that men are a victim of, I think that it's important to like recognize, like, I don't think that men are oppressed solely on the grounds that they're men. I think that men like experience oppression based on like the intersections of their identities, which is, why we see like
What?
different like lower class jobs being worked by men, or like higher suicide rates, or like incarceration rates going up, because like men, like black men, brown men, indigenous men, queer men, trans men, etc., those people like face oppression, they experience oppression, but it's not solely due to their identity as a man.
But I think dating and sex is probably a very interesting place to think about this, because it's changing field as far as like what people expect of each other.
I date in New York City a lot, and
So
dating
he's
wise,
talking about paying
there's a
$150.
lot that's like asked of a man. Like first dates are like nightmares.
I've got a question on that, yeah.
Dude, it's like I'm like, what do you want? They got like a checkbox like, are you gonna pick me up? Are you gonna walk on the outside of the sidewalk? Are you gonna open the door? Are you gonna pull out the seat? Are you gonna pay for the meal? Are you gonna be interesting during the dinner? Are you gonna be funny during the dinner? And then when you walk home, are you gonna drop me off? Are you gonna watch me walk inside? And then are you gonna text me after? And it's like trying to defuse a bomb. Like if
Yeah.
you think you're like red wire, blue wire, and you're like one little thing and you're just done. And it's like I'm to the point where I'm like, I'm so tired of like paying $150 for
Oh,
a
here it
first
is, the
date.
clip, man.
And then you just ghost me. And the next week I'm like hurting for cash. I'm like, I could have really used that $150. Like, why did I have to? You know what I'm saying?
Kind of the trade-off of like going on a date and
Oh, yeah,
as the
here we
man being
go.
like, oh,
Yeah,
this sucks,
yeah.
I have to pay, or as the woman being like, oh, this sucks, I might get murdered, is like a pretty big, imbalance.
On a first date,
Man,
should the man?
Yeah, I will say, like, it's obvious, right? The Vice edited the hell out of this, so I'm sure there are conversations that happen after somebody makes a point that they decided to cut out. Maybe you got heated. I'm not really sure, but I did want to call that out because obviously other men were about to chime in, and then this cut out. So
or whoever identifies as the man on the date pick up the check. Show of hands. Who thinks yes?
Yeah, should is a weird.
Yeah, shit's a weird way to put it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
How would you put it?
I mean, I was raised to pay, not just not on a date, but like just in general. If I invite you out, you could be a man or a woman. If I invite you out, I paid because I invited. That's the way that my Puerto Rican family raised me. So it is what it is.
I love gender roles. I like masculine men, and I want my
Who would have thought, man, that I would agree so much? And you know what? It's funny, and this is an example of me checking my biases at the door, right? So I agree so much with a lot of what Christian is saying, and he's a gay dude, and we may not have a lot in common, but as far as what we believe to be a man, whether or not it's men and women, gender roles, things like that, we seem to agree on quite a lot.
Masculine man to pick the check up. My friends seem to be the same. My girlfriends seem to want that as well. But I have a male friend who was naturally doing that. And with the dates he was going on with women, they were offended that he took the check. So I think hey, if this woman doesn't want him to pay and she wants to
you
show
could always have a conversation about it. I don't know.
Go off.
I think it's a matter of preference. If someone picked it up for you, you develop a kind of rapport, respect with that person. So be it. If the other person, the woman you're with doesn't want that, then maybe it's not the match for that person. So I think it's dependent on the situation.
I think that there's such a thing as financial abuse. And men
Bro, hold on a second. What do you? Before he even goes into his point, we're talking about picking up the check, for dinner. So you're talking about financial abuse. It's like, homie, we're just talking about paying for the first date. So, where are you going with this?
A lot of time because they spend, that woman has to be under them or owes them something.
I think that's when you get toxic.
Me personally, I love to take care of my partner. I love that feeling that I give them that they're taken care of when they're with me. And that's when it's with friends, anybody. If you're with me, I got you.
I guess what I'm hearing from you, Andre, is that there's a lot of pressure to inhabit the masculine side
because
of
you're
the
a
social
man.
expectation. And yet you might not get the benefit that you would have expected generations ago.
Well, so right there, I think that comes down to immaturity, right? You should just want to be a masculine male because you are a man. Regardless of what perceived benefits you may get from it. So you pick up the check because you think that that's the right thing for a man to do. Take everything else out of the equation. You shouldn't do things expecting something in return. That's immature. And if that's why you're doing it, you need to grow up. But yeah, I mean, if the expectations of you being a masculine man should 100% be there for you because you are a male. So by all means, inhabit that space.
And that puts you in a weird position.
Yeah, well, we live in a city where there's 8 million people, and a lot of these girls, especially if you're really attractive, guys are hitting on them all day. So they feel like celebrities. You got so many options. I don't blame you. I'd be the same way. Becomes
There's always somebody better.
I think technology has a big part to do with that now. Modern times, online dating, Instagram.
Especially as a girl, you're gonna have 30 DMs a day.
Yeah, the DMs.
You know what I'm saying? Swiping up on your picture.
I think that's a big reason why it can be tougher for some men.
Not successful.
I think what he's saying is
successful.
there's a toxicity to femininity as well. There is a toxic side to both genders.
Well, on the
I think
flip
anybody
side-
can be narcissistic, but I think that it's like weird to randomly attribute that to like women in New York because they're being complimented all day.
There's a term, it's called absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, but that is, when we're talking about masculinity, that's what we've had. We've typically had that. We can do whatever we want, and we do it because we squeeze, we corrupt, we take. Historically, you take over things.
Hey, man, my man Tahoe's here playing real fast and loose with we. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, homie. Like, we. Absolute power as in what? Who? Maybe the elite, maybe the rich. But throughout history, there have always been men who have been equally subjugated by the controlling powers, and I would say probably even more so, right? Where if you go all the way back, men were the ones being forced to do the hard slave labor, and we can go all the way, whether we're looking at like Mesopotamia or Egypt, it was the men, the strong men, who would be forced to carry these big rocks so that they can build these structures. So subjugation happened to both men and women at the hands of the elite. So saying we as in men had the power and the control, it's like there were plenty of women that were living under powerful men that were living a much better life than the vast majority of other men who were living under the rule of these corrupt elite men. So playing real fast and loose with we. I don't know who we is.
Places that you don't like, and you rape the women, and you take the gold, and you do what you want because you have that power.
And you murder the men who were there who tried defending their women, right? Let's not forget, right? So yeah, we could talk about rape and taking gold and stuff like that, but every place that people went to conquer, there were also men who tried defending their homes and they lost. So men were also victims of this stuff. Painting it in this one-sided way, again, it's someone who clearly misunderstands history and lacks critical thinking.
Now, when we see women have that power, we're like, whoa, she's literally
have
just
what
giving
power? The power to rape and steal your gold? Like, what are you talking about, homie?
Taste of the power that men have had for centuries.
But on the flip side of this perspective of dating, of like the poor guy who goes on these dates and gets ghosted, and it's a struggle to date. On the other side of that is men have more sex, men cheat more, they have more affairs. So if I'm a woman and I'm looking for a guy,
you'd want to be
I would be
selective.
really selective. I would have a list of what I was looking for, and the guy would have to meet those standards, and they would be high.
I think over the last several years, the MeToo
And by the
movement-
way, like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with high standards. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there. And you men, if you're watching this, by all means, you should have higher standards, right? You should have higher standards. There are women that are wife material and there are women that are not, right? And you should have high standards. You should try to find the women that are wife material. You're not a victim here, right? If you don't fit the criteria that a woman is looking for, that's fine. Move on. Find somebody else, right? You should also be selective, because the last thing you want to do is settle down with a hoe and 2 years into your marriage, she's banging all your homies. By all means, be selective. Wait. And I understand that the landscape has changed and all of that, but this can go both ways, right? Just because the women are selective doesn't mean that you're a victim. You could also have high standards for yourself and what you look for in a woman, and there are going to be plenty of women that fall short of that. And you need to be, I guess, a little less desperate, right? To be able to wait and find the right woman and not just jump at the first opportunity that decides to spread her legs.
Has given a lot of insight into what women are feeling in the workplace, what they're experiencing,
MeToo
how they're
movement.
being abused and otherwise silenced, how institutions of power have kept them silent. And we've heard some really awful stories and some terrible shit. I want to hear from you guys what you think about what the MeToo movement did. Has it gone too far? What does it mean for you?
Absolutely.
I think it's
it went
good
too
for
far.
women to expose men who are doing evil things in the workplace. I think it's been a good thing in exposing sexual abuse. There's also the opposite side of that coin where women are allowed privilege to do certain things that men are not. So in the workplace, I was working at a place where a woman was grabbing me inappropriately, doing things that were inappropriate. And when you bring that up to your coworkers, you know what they say? They laugh and they say, you should be excited, right? So if a man is sexually abused, the stigma totally changes.
Which that's
I don't
happened to
think
me
Me
before.
Too
But
necessarily like is what prevented people from believing you and your story. And like your story is
I agree
valid.
with
Like
Griffin
I'm not here
here.
to suppress that, but I do think that like it's worth noting women are far more likely to be victims of sexual assault.
You just experienced a little bit of weakness that women
Here
feel
we go,
most of the time.
When we're talking about constructs, you guys are saying we need to deconstruct masculinity. I'm saying there are unequal biases with both genders.
When it comes to
all right, so I actually agree with Griffin and like, hey, what happened to Casey? Like that's wrong. But I don't think the Me Too movement had anything to do with that, right? What I will say is the Me Too movement, what we did see was a rise in the weaponization of accusations, in my opinion. So I mean, that could definitely be something that people could talk about here, and I'm surprised that hasn't come up already.
It not necessarily being as viewed as valid. It happens to be the case because of other men, though. You know what I'm saying? Like other men are the people that downplay that, and that's where we come back to the talk of patriarchy and things like that.
Was put in place by men and is enforced by men.
Well, and I went for a walk to get dinner last night. And I walked several blocks because I wanted to check out a few things. And it was dark. Not a single time did the idea that I would be physically or sexually assaulted cross my mind. Not a single time. Now, I can imagine that doesn't really work out for women.
It comes down to biological differences. As a man, you're more likely to be able to have more of a chance to fend off someone attacking you. As a woman, not really. So that's why, we have things like mace and tasers or having a gun.
Is it something about it's hard to admit that you're a victim?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And to
Yeah, I
complain
would agree
about it.
there.
People look at you like, remember Terry Crews? He can get his nuts squeezed and shit.
Right. It's like, why don't you do something? Why'd you let him?
Look how the world ridiculed him.
Look how how this panel is ridiculing somebody who brings this up.
Oh, you ain't do nothing. Like, oh, you a bitch. So we as men, especially guys that grew up in super masculine houses, we don't really like to admit weakness.
Well, and it's in our language, right? Like, don't be a bitch. Like, don't be a pussy.
Right.
Like it's very
We
real.
internalize that.
Yeah, that's all examples of like toxic masculinity. Like, it's never to invalidate somebody's
I mean, it
experience,
is.
but like it must be obvious that like these are rules and roles enforced by men and created by men.
Well, and toxic masculinity and power kind of go hand in hand. I mean, we're talking about peanut butter and jelly.
You know what it is? I think sometimes we got to go to work, and like if we're caught complaining about it, we're like admitting weakness. It's like you're not a man.
How does that feel?
It doesn't feel great, but that doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. If you talk about a little bit of pressure that goes with it, yeah, there's a little bit of pressure.
So I'm hearing a recurring theme come up, and I think it's important to kind of stop here and talk about it a little bit. So they're talking about admitting weakness, whether it's like getting sexually assaulted, somebody grabbing your nuts or something like that, or you just saying, complaining about something that's going on. Look, I think that men in particular need to bear that cross willingly, and they shouldn't complain, right? I should bear the burden of my responsibility without complaining, because I am where I put myself in life, right? I am where I put myself in life. And there's something empowering about bearing that cross, bearing that burden and that responsibility every single day with a cheerful disposition. And honestly, I've learned a lot more about this since I decided to buy a farm and raise animals and things like that, where there are no days off. Every single morning, you got to go outside, you got to feed the animals, you got to do what you got to do. Now, what I will say is, like, these men, when we're talking about, oh, you can't complain and whatever, we need to exercise some wisdom in who we're talking to about our problems. There are certain problems that I go to my wife and I talk to her about. I never voice anything as a complaint or anything like that, but rather, share what's going on. She's my wife, right? The two of us became one. But then there are other problems, other concerns that I would only talk to close male friends. And those are things that, my personal fears. There are some fears that I would share with my wife, but then there are other fears that I wouldn't share with my wife because I don't want to make her afraid. She understands the situation. She knows what's going on, but my actual feelings, those things in those scenarios, like fear, right? I'm afraid or I'm worried about something, or I need some advice, I need some perspective. I would go to a trusted male friend, where I can voice my opinion and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through. I could use some perspective. Hear me out. And at that point, those friends, if they're good, and you got to find them and you have to cultivate those relationships, they would tell you at that point, it's like, all right, I hear what you're saying. You're kind of being a little bit of a pussy right now. You're being weak. Like, you need to power through. Or they can say, man, I'm sorry to hear that. Right. Is there anything I can do to help you? Right. Let's think about this together. Let's brainstorm a solution. So it really depends on the situation. It depends on how you're approaching it. It depends on who you're talking to. So, airing your weaknesses, airing your problems to people, which is something that has become more and more common in this era of expressive individualism, is absolutely a problem. You should not be doing that. You should not be talking to a girl that you're dating about something that's extremely serious, depending on where you are in your relationship, extremely serious and consequential in your life, right? Those are things that you need trusted advisors in your life to bounce things off of so that they can help you through that. So complaining absolutely is seen as a sign of weakness, and I'm sure that's going to turn a lot of women off.
Sure. If you can withstand it, you become a successful man.
But what does that have to do with being
I
a
agree.
man? Like,
Everything.
surely like a woman can do all those things, so why even attribute it to your gender?
That's a good point, but I think also if you're talking in terms of biological differences, generally men are more logical, right? More reasoning, more
I
factual
disagree.
based.
There is no scientific backing for that whatsoever.
I just think it's a commonly
So
used.
that's actually false, and I've done some research on this, and I'll post the link in the description to the article, or I think to the study that I'm talking about. Like, masculinity is a topic that I've researched on my own time just because I'm very interested in it. I want to become a better man, so it's something that I like to understand. LGBTQ issues and men becoming women, women becoming men is something that I disagree with. So it's also something that I've tried to understand. Stanford University, one of the most respected academic universities on the planet, institutions on the planet, they publish studies that show that men and women, boys and girls, differ as early as 2 months old in brain activity. That difference in brain activity translates to differences in how we think and how we move and how we operate. So saying that there's no science, I totally disagree. It is someone who, again, is regurgitating the talking points of like an NYU professor who has blue hair. That's not someone who understands society and has actually read the science on it. And I'll post a link to that Stanford article because one of the biggest points here to refute what Griffin just said is that the differences are seen as early as 2 months old. Then you can't deny that at that point, nurture has nothing to do with it. It's entirely nature. It is entirely nature. Boys and girls are different. Men and women are different. And those differences in brain activity translate into differences in actual activity, in actions, in the way we think, in the way we move and operate.
Stereotype. I mean, I'm
So
not.
I guess maybe talking about, okay, you guys can say that. I think more about me. Like, I'm more of like a logical, factual based guy. Like, I have emotions, but I don't let that deter me
I have
from what
emotions.
I need to do. Like my reasoning.
Do you talk with people about your emotions?
And I mean, hey, typically, I don't know why everybody's jumping down his throat. Typically, women tend to be more overt in the way they show their emotions. They display their emotions. They wear their heart on the sleeve. Like that's something that I don't know why it's taboo to even talk about it. Like women tend to be more emotional in that regard, right? Men tend to be more reserved when it comes to their emotions. So what he's saying is completely true. The problem is that most of the men on this panel are too weak to say things that might piss somebody off. They're walking on eggshells. They don't want somebody to label them one thing or another, and they're conceding the point. Like, you got to push back on this stuff. Like, women and men are different, and emotion is a perfect example of how women and men are different.
I mean, I have friends. I have close guy friends I can talk to.
You do?
Yeah.
There's an interesting thing came out where like guys these days have fewer than 3 friends. Like it's hard for men to make friends with each other.
I think that's a big problem now in modern times because you hear about the suicide rates going up. I think that's a big reason for it. Men aren't allowed to talk about it with safe people. So if you talk about masculinity crisis, that's the crisis right there.
I think that men find friends very easily in terms of like, oh, yo, you lift 240, I lift 242. Let's like spot each other like basketball. Or whatever.
Man, first of all, this dude's only lifting drumsticks out of the KFC bucket. Men, actual friends, no. I can tell you right now that I struggle making friends because of the level of immaturity, and this goes back to the masculinity crisis. There are plenty of men who are in their mid-20s. Early 30s that are so immature. They are grown boys. They are so immature that I can't stomach their presence. And it makes it very difficult for me to be able to be friends with them. The friends that I have now that I confide in, these are men in their 40s. These are men that have been around, that are mature, and then they see something. I'm 30 years old. They see something in me, and they realize, oh, he's a mature individual. So to say, and again, the chubby guy in the back, he's talking about a superficial relationship, oh, you bench 240, I bench 240, let's be friends. That's a superficial, like, that's not somebody you can talk to. If the only thing you have in common is the fact that you're gym bros, that's not a friendship, that's an acquaintance. You guys share things in common. This guy doesn't understand what friendship actually means, right? Somebody who would like go to battle, like fight a war with you, who would be in the foxhole with you, who will take care of your family if you ever died, like those are friendships. Those are friendships. What he's talking about is a gym bro who'd like, make an Instagram post or tweet something out if you ever committed suicide. It's like, damn, homie, gone too soon. That's not a friendship. That's not a friendship. So like men have fewer, I think like actual men, real men who are trying to be better men, not lacking definition of what it means to be a man, find it difficult to make friends because we are prolonging adolescence. We are prolonging, like men are staying boys, staying children for longer and longer and longer. So whenever there's a man who's trying to actually achieve something, who's trying to grow up, who's trying to fill the roles that society is calling on him to fulfill and fill, like those men are having a difficult time finding friendships because most of his peers are immature. And I can tell you a lot of the people that I have around me that are close to my age are very immature that I wouldn't want to spend time with. They're talking about nonsense that just doesn't make any sense. A lot of them are waiting to start families for valid reasons. Kids are expensive, wives are expensive, right? So like they could be waiting to start families for very valid reasons. But when we're in such different places in our lives, it makes it very difficult for us to actually form a meaningful relationship. So there are, to say that men make friends easily, it is coming from somebody who is either extremely immature or just lacks understanding and wisdom.
But I think that we have superficial relationships in those friendships, in which like it's very like surface level, like coming back to what you're talking about. We don't talk about feelings and things like that. That comes back to how, you're brought up and how like boys are taught in certain ways, how we go about talking to each other and how we go about expressing ourselves.
How much of this is men putting ourselves in a little box? I can tell you,
Man, this guy just loves boxes.
Wouldn't have shared my emotions with people when I was younger, but I have people in my life now who I feel completely comfortable sharing my insecurities, my vulnerabilities, how I'm feeling. That ends up being one of the reasons why men end up with limited friends. Because I mean, how many people can you actually feel like you can be open and honest with?
But there's something holding people back.
Yeah, and I think it's us. I think we're doing it because we're putting ourselves in this masculinity box, if you will.
I think that vulnerability for men oftentimes is viewed as surrender, and like that is that's an example of weakness in which like someone can possibly take advantage of it, or it used to be viewed as such, where it's like, all right, cool, like he cried, oh, that means he's soft, so now I can challenge him.
And this is something that I really struggle with. As a black man that grew up in the hood, you couldn't be soft.
The second time we hear that, man, we already knew.
You couldn't come outside. You know what I'm saying? So you had to take on this persona in order to be a quote unquote man. As I got older, I realized I still had to do that with women. I had to be a certain way for them to look at me as a man. And if I didn't perform in that manner, they also called me a bitch.
Yeah, they want a real like
right.
Poster.
So it's like, as progressive as I may want to be, is the
and
world
he's doing a good job
that as a whole? Because even if the other men don't like it, but the women like it, I might be like, I don't care what the guys think, as long as the women like it. But there are spaces
but they don't like it
where the women will be like,
yeah, they want a man.
He wants a finger in his butt. Sorry.
Let's talk about fingers in
like
the butt.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's not my type of guy.
Christian's like, hey man, let me talk to you.
And I can't be open with sex or accepting having gay friends.
That's what you like.
But I can't. Right. You can't be open about certain things because then you become questionable and you're pushed out of the safe space.
Sex is a difficult thing for men to talk about, even with each other, especially if you do have some kind of kink.
Because you're not allowed to be vulnerable. You're not.
So, like, really quick, why do we feel the need to talk about sex with other people? Like, just why? I don't understand it. I genuinely don't get it. I used to, when I was a teenager, yeah, I mean, of course, that was like a badge of honor. Why? Because I was immature, I was insecure. These are all things that I felt added to my status. So only somebody who's extremely immature puts sex at the center of their identity, where they feel the need to talk about it. And we see this a lot in a certain community. But why do you feel the need to talk about sex? Like your marital issues, whether you're married and you don't have any sex, or your wife doesn't like the same things you do or whatever. Why do you feel the need to discuss that with anybody other than your wife? Maybe a marriage counselor, right? But again, airing extremely personal things is something that's become so common in the past decade. maybe longer, I'm not sure, but definitely in the social media age where everybody feels the need to share and overshare and disclose everything about their life, and you feel like you have to do it. Like you don't actually. There are certain topics that you shouldn't be sharing and talking about with other people. Like, I mean, I don't know why you got to tell your homies that you like a finger in your butt, unless you want their finger in your butt. Like, I don't, like, what are you even talking about, man? Like, come on.
Allowed to be weak. You're not allowed to fail. And a lot of people that when you say the suicide rates, you give up because you have nowhere to turn.
I kind of disagree with you on the fact about that pressure is causing. I think it's more the lack of support and guidance for a lot of guys. Like they don't know where to turn. Like a lot of guys, you know, suicide I think is like when you lose hope, right? So they just don't have hope.
What about not wanting to go get it? Because there's places to be, there's people to go. You can go to church. I mean, you can go to therapy.
As
There's
much as
places
you
to
say
go.
that, but I don't feel like, you know, when you say guys don't want to
Hey, as somebody who struggled with mental health, right? It's not so much that like there are places where you can go and stuff like that. Of course there are, right? But when you reach this low point in depression or whatever it may be, you really do lack the perspective to be able to see things clearly. So, you know, sometimes having a heavy-handed friend who you know is going to take, you know, help you rip you out of that is helpful, right? That could be beneficial. But to just say, you know, I think that it's a little bit more than just lacking hope, and it's a little more nuanced also than just saying there are places where you can go. Like the individual has to also assume the responsibility of wanting to take care of themselves, and that comes down to you, that internal struggle that everybody is fighting.
express weakness, I think taking that step is hard for a lot of men, because then that expresses weakness. It's hard for
You're
a lot of guys.
admitting
You know what's interesting? That what
there's
I'm
something
hearing is
wrong,
that
right?
as men, you also are victimized by the sexist expectations of masculinity.
It also makes it hard for men to love themselves.
Why do you need to love yourself?
Love themselves enough to understand that they're in trouble, you know, and I know that's something that happened in my life. It was before I did finally go to therapy and get the demons out that I needed to get out. It took me meeting a woman who actually made me want to love myself.
You found a woman who gave you peace and changed you a lot. Well, great if a man is dating a woman and she doesn't like that he's not masculine enough, it's kind of like, to me, I feel like too bad for him. He should go find someone else. That's part of the dating scene. Everyone has things that they like and things that they don't like.
I feel like your preference is your preference, but at like some point, I think it's like noteworthy and responsible to like understand where those preferences or like originate.
Not necessarily. I think our life experiences form what we
man.
really want in our dating life. And
This is getting
because I
catty.
grew up in a broken home and I didn't have a man in the house, I want a man who gives me security and protection. I don't think me deconstructing masculine is going to do that for me. I was missing that in my childhood, and that's what I want in a man.
I tend to diverge from like the Freudian daddy issues stuff when it comes to like what
Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. I want a man who gives me security.
Thank you.
I think
Freud.
if I'm with a woman and the bad dates I've had is when I'm like talking about my problems, I'm complaining about something, I'm not gonna see that woman. If I'm projecting more strength, I'm more charismatic, I'm positive, I'm probably gonna see that woman. So I think as much as like guys, you know, you want guys to be vulnerable, that doesn't work a lot of times. And I think it just comes down to that.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what it is. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
And it sounds like a lot of you are saying that's wrong.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it is what it is.
I just think that society teaches you have to be a certain way.
Yeah, because that's what society historically has needed from men.
If this is who you are, your character, right? It just blossoms into this person that loves to pay for dates, loves to open doors, and loves to walk in the house, then that's fine. But when society tells you that from a young boy, that's the only way to be as a man. This is the only way to be. And you think about things like, say, people on the down low that don't want to come out till later because they're scared of societal pressures, right?
Tahoe, you can come out, bro.
You should be able to be whoever you want without society telling you you have to be this way in order to fit in this box.
All right. So I disagree, right? For a couple different reasons. If society was made up entirely of men like Griffin, we would be in worse shape than we currently are. So if let's just use conquest as an example here. If an invading army decided to come and take everything that belongs to us, and we needed men to defend the line, would you really trust Griffin to do that? Would you really put the safety security of your children in the hands of a dude in a dress? No. Society has these expectations because historically it's been useful, right? Men have been seen as expendable because a single man can procreate with however many different women. And, like that's fine. Men are bigger. So, hey, bigger, stronger, we fight the war. And like that's okay. A lot of the expectations that society has on masculinity, right? Whether it's strength, whether it's courage, things like that, they exist for a reason, and pretending like we just don't understand. Again, I think Tahoe might be gay, man. He's out here talking about coming out of the closet again. It's like there's nothing stopping you from doing that, and I wouldn't necessarily even uh, uh, tie being a man and whether or not you're straight or gay, right? You could still be a strong man, and be gay, as far as like your sexual orientation are concerned. Like, I may have my own opinion on those things, but a lot of the traits and the characteristics could be exhibited, with the exception of submission to God, right, for obvious reasons, could be exhibited by a gay man. But saying that the expectations that society has on men should be thrown out and they're not good and they're harmful, I think is a misunderstanding of the importance of these norms that have existed and the roles that men and women play.
Pressure is on like the body. Like pressure is to be buff, to like look good.
Hey.
There is a certain pressure, I guess you can call it, for guys to look a certain way, especially if they're trying to attract women. So I think it comes down to just men who look a certain way tend to look more competent. They can protect.
Okay.
I was just going to add on to what you were saying. If a guy looks fit, if a guy looks strong, okay, as a girl, she's probably thinking, if I'm on the street and somebody tries to do something to me, I know that he can handle it.
I also think generally, like, guys who don't have the body that they're looking for, or generally, they're not as healthy.
Yeah.
It's not just a look thing. It's
if
just
you're
a
fat,
health
you're not
thing.
healthy.
Yeah, the body and mind are connected. If someone is strong, they're probably going to look strong, and they're probably going to feel strong. So I think when you say it's a pressure, I think it can be construed as a healthy pressure. Hey, get strong, be strong, because you're going to be a healthier
you need to attract
and
a
more
woman,
mentally
right?
fit individual.
For example,
right,
I was a gymnast, and I think, the training that I did not only trained my body, but it winded up training my mind and making me a stronger human, period.
Yeah.
As the skinniest person here,
Pretty skinny.
you skinny? All right. As the second skinniest person here. No, it's like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, you do. I've had a bunch of girls like friend zone me, and I'd be like, why? And they're like, you're just too skinny.
Man.
And I'd be like, damn. I mean, they kept it so real. I can't.
That's, yeah.
But I'm
kind
like,
of
they have their preferences,
is saying that there is a good and natural connection between like feeling good, healthy habits, looking good, and that there's a masculine ideal to that of some sort.
Yes.
Does anyone disagree with that here?
I do. Body diversity exists across like multiple spectrums, and I think that it's unfair to like only attribute like mental fortitude and like mental strength to like physical strength. Not having like a perfectly in shape body doesn't necessarily mean you're unhealthy by any means, and I also don't think it necessarily means that you like lack mental fortitude.
Okay, so nobody's talking about a perfectly healthy body, right? Like what we're talking about is being in shape, and whether or not it attracts a mate, and if that's the expectation, the societal pressure, and things like that. Absolutely, right? There are signals that are sent to people if you are healthy and in shape. So if I'm a guy and I lift weights and I have nice muscles and things like that, that sends a signal to people that I am capable, and that I am healthy. I'm not going to die of a heart attack at 37 because I was too busy shoving Cheetos into my face. And it's totally okay and understandable for women to want to see a man who's close to that ideal. You don't have to be Mr. Olympia, right? But at the same time, like you also shouldn't have, a giant gut trying to attract a woman. Like that sends all the wrong signals. And I think what Paul's saying here is true. It's correct. People who are in shape, the link between good mental health and physical health are very clear. So if you're in shape, the chances of you having a good mental health, are pretty good. If you have the discipline to stick with something. That's the other thing. It sends the signals that you have the discipline, right, to be able to stick to a regimen over time, to eat the right things. And these are all good characteristics of a man, and these are all things that women are going to be looking for. So, in saying like, oh, I don't think that you have to have a perfect body, like Griffin, nobody's saying a perfect body, but what we're saying is that if you're fat, if you're out of shape, or rather if you're too small because you don't lift, you don't try to better yourself at all, those things are going to come across, and women are going to be able to tell. And yeah, if you're too skinny, like, that's fine. As somebody who was very skinny as a teenager, and I decided that I was gonna bulk up and eat when I was in the military. Like, I understand it's 100% doable, and I feel better about myself, more confident, more capable after I got bigger, after I got stronger. That I think many men would benefit from, whether they're losing weight or gaining weight.
I don't think I'm saying that um, to look strong is the only way to be mentally strong. I think as long as you feel like you have a competent physical body, I think that's going to benefit your mental health.
How do you define competent?
Yeah.
I think in terms of what you're trying to do. So are you a student? Like,
I mean, hey, BMI isn't perfect, but that's a start. You could say if you're 5'5" and you weigh 250 pounds, that might be a problem. If I'm 5'10" and I weigh 175, I'm healthy, right? So BMI would be a good start, right? Not falling in the obese or the super obese categories or whatever it is. So, that could be a place for us to consider.
what are your endeavors in life?
Me?
So
Yes.
what are
I'm
you
a student
what are you
athlete.
doing with your life,
Okay,
Griffin?
what kind of sport?
I'm a springboard diver.
Okay, do you train to do springboard diving?
Yeah.
Okay, and do you feel good when you train and you do well on the springboard?
Yeah.
I think
Griffin's
that's
like, where
what
are
I
you going
mean.
with this, Paul?
That's what I'm talking about. If you feel confident at the endeavors you're trying to do, I think that's
But I think
what
that there's
contributes
But
to
if
it.
you're not doing anything and you don't have any endeavors, then your body can look like, whatever, right?
lots of like non-athletic people who may not be in like the same physical shape as like an athlete would be,
Right.
who are competent in what they're trying to do because
Because they're
action
trying to do nothing.
has nothing to do with like their like.
So that's where I disagree
physical-
with you. That's where I
yeah.
disagree with you. I think some people who don't realize the potential for their physical to blend into their mental is something that needs to be talked about. I think it's undervalued.
It's not that you have to work out to have a competent mind. It's that working out does help with competency. We already know when you work out, endorphins are released. People feel better. There's so many times I wake up, I don't want to go to the gym. It's going to be the worst day ever. I'm in a bad mood. I go, my endorphins are released. I'm great. I'm woken up. Like we have the science for that. So
Especially if I'm
listen,
it's
I think it plays very little. We've had presidents in wheelchairs that were very confident, successful men
What are you talking
who
about?
couldn't walk. And so I'm going to say that
Tahoe's
it
favorite.
doesn't define you
I
as
think
a
there's
man.
always a
What is this?
No. So, okay, so this is the first point that I would disagree with Casey here is that, and Casey looks to be like a not overweight guy, right? And maybe we can take this to like a primal place, right? That if you needed to be able to fight to protect your wife and your children from an attacker, are you capable of doing that, right? I would probably put a little more faith in Griffin than I would in the guy next to him in this orange looking shirt, right? And being able to have the stamina to do that, and being able to defend off an attacker. So like there's a baseline I think that every man should try to pursue. Again, not saying that you have to train at the level of being an athlete, but you should be training and pushing yourself in some type of physical activity to where you can still move your body in ways if you needed to. There are so many men who just let themselves go and they're incapable of doing anything. That is a useless man. That is a useless man. And I believe that masculinity and manhood is a pursuit across your mind, your body, and your spirit. So you could be completely, you could be the best person as far as your mind. You have a PhD and you have a great job and they pay you a lot of money. And hey, maybe even you're a Christian and your spiritual health is doing well. But if your physical health is poor, I would say that you're lacking. As a man, you are less than you can be. Right, just putting that out there. I think that there is a baseline level of competence that every human being should be pursuing, and obesity is definitely not it, right? But men in particular, there's a baseline level of confidence that you need to be pursuing. And then after that, you know what, if you don't want to push it any further, that's fine, but you definitely shouldn't be obese, and you definitely shouldn't be gassed going up the stairs, right? So pretending like these things don't matter. Casey's over here bringing up FDR and polio and wheelchairs and stuff like that. It's like, that's not, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. Part of being a good man is being physically competent, being able to do things. If I ask you to lift 100-pound rock because we got to get it out of the way, or a log or something like that, and you look at me and you're like, I can't do that. I would think that's something that you would need to work on.
Societal pressure to be in shape for men.
I don't.
I don't like when when I'm having sex and my stomach is over her butt or whatever. Like I want to eat less. Me, but
Paul can
nobody's
change
like, yo,
that.
you're fat.
We've spent all this time like deconstructing masculinity and all these things, but then it seems as though if a woman or someone dating says, hey, I want a swole guy, suddenly it's like, sorry, I don't think that's a societal pressure. That's what that woman wants, and she's entitled to have.
But I also, I have body type.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like I'm not gonna say what it is, but there's certain girls where I would go on and I'm like, you don't really have what I'm looking. I don't say that because that's
it's all right.
But in my
you
head,
can say that.
I'm just like, this isn't gonna work.
So it's one thing to have a preference and another thing to make like a sweeping conclusion.
All right, make a sweeping conclusion. We can obviously tell what is healthy and what is not, right? That's not a sweeping conclusion. There's science that backs that if you're fat and overweight, that's unhealthy. If you're underweight, that's also unhealthy. This isn't a sweeping conclusion. It's simply a matter of fact. And the fact that we can't even call facts out, right, without Griffin coming in and be like, well, actually, this is all a spectrum. Like, it's funny, but like, what could you expect?
And then broadcast it everywhere.
No, people are entitled to date their preference.
Because when you look at statistics, they say that 70% of CEOs are over the size 6'4", for example. So there is amongst men a pressure to be bigger, and bigger men tend to be in charge, and that's proven. Statistically proven.
All privilege.
And so there is a pressure for men who are naturally smaller, naturally overweight, naturally not as fit, to become fit or to become bigger.
Complex or something.
Oh, and every one of us here have heard little man syndrome. We've all
Who hasn't heard that
every one
saying?
of us.
He's got Napoleon syndrome. He's got little man syndrome.
Yeah, that's a thing, though.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it, and that's where it becomes harmful. Specifically, short king spring or whatever. Like a person, you can't there is I guess on Twitter I've seen
yeah, you may not be able to grow, but you can definitely
6 inches to their height or something like that.
Lose some weight.
You know what I mean? It's but besides that, which is a really expensive procedure, it's also comes into socioeconomic background and things like that as well too. And it's you literally can't do anything about that. I think that's where it becomes harmful. Which all right, if there is the pressure in which I can't date a person or I can't get a position or I can't do X, Y, and Z because I'm not a certain height. Or something I literally cannot change about myself, what now?
It's funny that he's tiptoeing around the weight issue, right? Because he's obviously fat. So I think that's pretty funny.
What is big dick energy?
Oh man, BDE.
It's when confidence crosses the line of arrogance. That's exactly.
People have told me I have BDE.
You have BDE?
Yeah, people told me I had BDE.
You did in that back room.
Not to show off.
Right? Even he said.
He's like, look, the gay guy says
I think BDE is just a confident man. I don't think it's an arrogant man. I don't find arrogance to be big dick energy. I find it to be insecure. If you're arrogant, you're trying to
I find it so odd to equate somebody's the size of their genitals to the quality of their character. What? That's nobody's
There's a lot
business.
of it's more of just a metaphor.
I don't agree.
Yeah, for confidence.
But then it comes back. Now we're getting into a deeper conversation, which some men see a value based off the size of what they're getting between their legs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why the conversation of big dick energy comes into place, because people feel as though a man that's more. That's packing more down there, you know what I mean, is more one, they're better in bed, they're more confident people, they're exuding a certain energy. So that the stereotypes. So the stereotypes associated with having a big dick.
The lack of a need to overcompensate to society because you're adequate.
You know what you got.
You walk with confidence because you can tell when somebody's putting on because they lack in certain ways. And men, me, and people I know equate manhood and masculinity to their dick size and how much money they got. Mm-hmm. It's yo, you feel more confident.
And sometimes that kind of stuff bleeds into violence. And you see that in domestic violence situations, men are the perpetrators of that by and large. There's something wrong with masculinity when it becomes violent.
Don't let Johnny Depp hear you.
100%. I also think because of testosterone and a number of different things, men are inherently more violent.
But being able to control it, that's
violence isn't a bad thing, right? I think there's this misconception that violence is a bad thing, and there are being able to do violence when the situation calls for it is a very good thing. And I think that that's something that men should be striving towards, is being able to handle business if it ever came down to it. You know, if me and my wife are out on a date and somebody decides that they're going to try to snatch her purse, um, I am absolutely going to tear that man apart. And that's why I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu like 8 times a week. I lift weights, I run, my cardio is good. You know, my mind is right. Like all of these things, right? I try to train for this hypothetical scenario that, God willing, never happens, right? Violence in and of itself, when you use violence in the correct way, and hopefully they get into this, when you use violence in the correct way, it is a good thing. Good people defending, innocent people against bad people is a very noble thing. And for you to be able to defend the innocent, like you have to do violence. So it's not, and yeah, testosterone has plays a role in men being aggressive. Absolutely, and aggression again isn't a bad thing. And this is coming from me. I'm raising 2 boys. And I got I got 2 of my kids in jujitsu right now. My other one's too young, but we train. Every single week we train, and I'm teaching them how to harness their aggression, how to use it, when to use it, things like that. But aggression, violence in and of themselves, there is a time and a place, and I don't think that we should be saying that these things are bad. We need to learn how to cultivate them and how to instill these ideas in young men so that they don't go out and abuse the natural power that's been given to us. So yeah, hopefully we get into this.
Being able to control.
That's where the
Yeah.
responsibility comes in.
Yeah.
I think you hear the whole saying like it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Man, this panel is full
And
of
I think
cliches, I'll tell you, but he is
There's
right.
a lot of wisdom behind that saying.
Yeah,
George Orwell said people sleep peaceably in their beds at night because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. I think that's a big thing, but the key is to be ready, to have the ability.
And this goes back to those body standards, right? You do not have the ability to be ready if you are fat and overweight or if you're skinny and frail. You just don't. So when we're talking about being ready to do violence on others' behalf, like, well, what does being ready actually mean? If we're talking in the modern age, do you actually train in any type of like combat related sport? Have you ever thrown a punch? Do you know how to draw a weapon from a holster? Do you know how to do any of these things that would be considered being ready? If the answer is no, then in that aspect of being a man, I would say that you're failing. And this is a very important part of being a man. That's the protect part of being a man. It is your job to protect, whether it's your wife, your children, the country, whatever it may be. That responsibility falls on us. So being ready means that every man should be training in something, right? Staying in some type of baseline level of health and fitness, and then yeah, maybe being competent with a gun, maybe being competent with their hands. These are all things that men should be pursuing, this excellence. And to pretend like it's not important and it doesn't matter, I think we're missing the importance here.
And also the humility and the confidence to not use it unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't think we teach boys that enough because I think promoting violence is extremely toxic.
Is there something inherently violent about masculinity?
Inherently violent? I don't think so.
The potential for violence is definitely.
Majority.
I mean, inherently violent. No, like if we're attributing something negative to it, but I do think that the potential for violence exists in all men, and I think it's there for a reason. For people who believe in evolution, the idea that we evolved to be able to like fight bears and stuff like that. Like that's in us for a reason, right? And the people who were fighting bears were the men, while the women stayed with the children, and that makes perfect sense. So the ability for you to do violence, I think, is inherent in every single person. I would say it's also inherent probably in every single male. I didn't have to teach my daughter how to pimp slap my son when she was like 6 months old. So I think the ability to do violence exists on both, but it's definitely more prominent in males.
Of men were bad, evil, violent. A lot of us would not be sitting here today. Okay, we'd still be in the Stone Age. You know what I mean? That's why I kind of push back against that idea that inherently men are violent, inherently masculinity is bad, is violent, because I don't believe that that's true.
Why do you think that such a vast majority of mass shootings are done by men?
I think that's a mental health issue. I think that, and this is why we're talking about men in crisis. Yeah, because men are more willing to do what they have to, to not do what they have to do, but to take action.
Yeah.
In terms of that, and that's how we talk about this. Men in crisis.
It's the same reason why men kill themselves more often than females.
Because a lot of males, they don't know how to have an outlet or to find outlets to talk about what their issues are. That's what it comes down to.
We know that these mass shooters, most of them are white males. We know that. So when I talk to a lot of white males that have traditional values, say, or maybe a traditional upbringing, they feel like they've been made to be the villains of society. And so I feel that pressure a lot of times. I feel like, hey, like when we're having this conversation, even I hear words like patriarchy, traditional society, right? So I feel like I'm being put in a box and made to be the villain. And I hear this from a lot of white males. I feel like I'm the bad guy. I feel like I'm the villain. So maybe at some point, mentally, they're breaking and becoming that villain. They're becoming that monster that they've been made out to be.
Be the exception. Yeah. If you're worried about being put into a box,
but I mean, like Casey is the he's sitting on this panel as the except, right? So like, and the exceptions are actually the people who go out and commit the mass shootings, because the vast majority of white males are good, law-abiding citizens, right? So I think what Casey's saying here is valid, right? I think that as a society, we've been labeling everybody who's white, especially white males, as part of the problem, right? Especially when we start talking about intersectionality, critical race theory, and things like that, we have been talking down to white males for so long that we have displaced them from society, and we have told them that their voice doesn't count, that they're lesser, that they need to sit this one out, all of these things. And that bleeds over. And when you take somebody who is already in a bad place, and then you add these societal pressures, I can understand and relate to what Casey is saying. So, and then when Griffin's going and be the exception, right? Don't go out and kill people. It's like Casey sitting on this panel is the exception, right? Or rather, like, he's part of the demographic that just wants to be left alone. Like, don't call me a bad person just because I'm a white male. But obviously, like, we're probably gonna get some interesting gaslighting here.
That is like clearly harmful based on like what people are doing. Then don't do that. Mass shooters is like obviously like a sensitive topic, but a lot of them are like men with like little to no friends who like go out and in like a burst of rage commit like atrocities. And I don't think that it has to do with how they're hardwired as men.
Griffin,
I think that it has to do
with
how society like treats people like that.
I agree with you on the point that men need support and they need someone.
Isn't that what Casey just said? So Griffin said, I don't think, it's how society treats people. So like, that's what Casey was saying, right? Maybe I heard that wrong. I don't know.
To talk to and talk about these issues.
I don't think that men have been taught emotional intelligence throughout life, right? We know, so we respond with anger. All right, if I'm disappointed, if I feel resentment, or I feel contempt, or I feel embarrassment, or I feel jealous, or any of these things that fall under that one thing, we respond with one way. And if we learn how to communicate better, if we were able to say, yo, you know what? I resent that you spoke to me that way. Or, I feel jealous, of whatever. If it was okay for men to express those things, we wouldn't feel a need to just go, you know what? Fuck you.
You can take any two 3-year-olds. You take a 3-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. I have 2 girls. Their first instinct is to lie to me, to manipulate me, to say their sister said this when she didn't. I have a friend that has all boys. You know what they do? They throw a fire truck at your head. Bam. That's a natural response. That's not a learned behavior. They're tough.
Oh, that's totally a learned behavior. And you give kids only like cars and gun and G.I. Joe action figures and give girls Barbie dolls. Like you
I don't think you can say it's one of.
So like, I mean, I can kind of understand the point that Casey's trying to make. And again, I already kind of alluded to this study from Stanford, right? That there are differences as early as 2 months old, right? So in trying to pretend like those differences don't exist. But I will say that violence, I have both, I have 2 sons and a daughter. My daughter has done plenty of violent things, and I'm like, where did she learn that from? At an early age. Now I'm treating her, now I'm teaching her jujitsu, so she'll get my son in a rear naked choke, and it's like, all right, as long as her form was good, I won't get mad. But again, violence is something that both genders can do. But I will say that I believe that men and boys are more inclined to solve their problems aggressively as opposed to girls.
Or the other, I think there is some interplay between both.
To thank you guys for your honesty, your willingness to go to uncomfortable places, willingness to.
Well, there you have it, folks. This was a pretty interesting panel. I got to say, all in all, I'm pretty disappointed that for the most part, a lot of the definitions of what it means to be a man were very fluffy, right? Like very few people actually gave a solid definition with tangible things of what it means to be a man. Casey started strong with his 5 point essay on what it means to be a man. Christian, I think that was his name, the gay guy in the bottom right corner, also was pretty base. A lot of the stuff he was saying were true. But then there was a lot of parroting of leftist talking points, and especially from Griffin, but also from somebody like Tahoe, he's probably in the closet. And if you're gay, man, that's cool. Like that's totally cool. But yeah, it's just parroting these different talking points where I think that in a lot of ways, like the essence of what it means to be a man was kind of left out. Obviously as a Christian myself, I everything that Casey said for the most part really resonated with me. There were some points that I disagreed with him on, but all in all, I thought this panel was pretty interesting. I had actually watched the feminist panel, and I'm not getting anywhere near that one as far as a reaction video is concerned. So I had fun making this video. If you guys like this, make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, do all of that. I appreciate your support, and I'll catch you all next time. Peace.